The wind howled across the New Mexico plains, carrying with it sand, cold, and the memories of a land that had seen too much blood. Jacob Grady tightened his coat as he stepped toward his barn, lantern in hand. A restless horse had been kicking at the boards, or so he thought. Jacob Grady had witnessed plenty in his years on the frontier: wild horses stampeding across the mesa, outlaw raids that left homesteads burning behind him, and neighbors buried far too young. But nothing, not gunfights, not storms, not even the war he once survived, prepared him for what waited inside his barn that night. As he pushed the door open, the lantern's light swung across the straw-covered floor and froze on two shapes huddled in the corner. An elderly Apache woman, her face lined with hunger and pain, clutched a frail teenage girl tightly against her chest. Their clothes were torn, their feet bare, their eyes filled with pure, animal fear. When Jacob stepped closer, the girl lifted an arm, shielding her mother, whispering words he didn't understand. Thunder rumbled across the distant canyons, echoing like a warning. The lantern flickered. The barn smelled of cold earth, sweat, and desperation. Jacob's breath caught. 1,000 questions flashed through his mind, but one stood above the rest. Why were they hiding on his land, and what danger were they running from that was worse than being caught in a stranger's barn? He opened his mouth to speak, and the girl whispered, trembling, "Please, don't call for help." And that was when Jacob knew this night was about to change everything. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The New Mexico frontier in the late 1800s was a land of uneasy silence, the kind that came after too many battles, too many broken promises, and too many graves dug into soil that refused to forget. Settlers and Apache tribes lived side by side, but peace existed only on paper. Treaties were signed in the daylight and shattered by nightfall. Every rancher knew someone who had lost a home, and every Apache family knew someone who had been pushed from theirs. It was in the middle of this fragile, flickering truce that Jacob Grady carved out a quiet life on his modest ranch. Jacob wasn't the kind of man who went looking for trouble. He had seen enough to last a lifetime. As a young cowboy, he had survived skirmishes along the borderlands, clashes between militias and wandering Apache groups that were often sparked by misunderstandings, or fear, or pure desperation. He carried the memories like old scars, painful, but part of him now. After the fighting, Jacob did what many men failed to do: he walked away. Bought a small piece of land. Raised cattle. Lived with only the sound of wind and hooves for company. But the frontier had changed. Tension simmered once more. Vigilante groups, ranch hands, drifters, and restless young men hungry for glory roamed the backcountry, armed with rifles and rumors. They claimed they were protecting settlers, but many were simply hunting displaced native families trying to survive after their lands were taken. Anyone found helping an Apache risked their own life. People had been beaten, or hanged, for less. Jacob knew all this too well. So when he found the starving elderly woman and her daughter hiding in his barn, the weight of the moment pressed on him like a storm cloud ready to burst. Helping them meant defying the unwritten law of the frontier. If the vigilantes heard even a whisper, Jacob could lose his ranch or his life. But turning them in? He had seen what happened to Apache captives. He had seen women dragged by their hair, children taken, elders shot as warnings. He couldn't pretend ignorance. That night, Jacob stood between two worlds. The world of settlers, who expected loyalty, and the world of suffering he could no longer ignore. His lantern flickered across the faces of the two strangers, faces that held fear, exhaustion, and a quiet plea for mercy. The girl held her mother's trembling hand. The old woman's eyes met Jacob's, not with anger, not with accusation, but with the look of someone who had run out of places to run. Jacob swallowed hard. The frontier wasn't just a line on a map. It was a line inside every man, the line between fear and conscience. And Jacob Grady was about to cross his. Jacob stood in the dim barn, lantern trembling slightly in his hand as he faced the two figures crouched against the far wall. Straw clung to their clothes. Their breaths came in sharp, frightened bursts. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft rustling of the barn rafters and the distant rumble of desert thunder. The elderly woman looked up first. Her hair was long and silver, braided with strands of leather and beads now charred from smoke. Her face, weathered by sun and suffering, carried a dignity even in exhaustion. When Jacob knelt a few feet away, she flinched not out of distrust, but out of sheer, bone-deep fear. The girl shifted protectively, placing herself between Jacob and her mother. She was young, maybe 16 or 17, with sharp features softened by hunger and fatigue. Her name, he would soon learn, was Naira. "Atsa," the girl whispered, touching her mother's arm. That was the old woman's name. Jacob spoke softly, careful not to startle them. "I ain't here to hurt you." The old woman, Atsa, tried to reply, but only a faint, cracked sound escaped. She knew only scattered English words. Her eyes said the rest, pleading, wounded, asking for mercy without ever forming a sentence. It was Naira who finally spoke for them. Her voice was thin at first, trembling like a leaf caught in winter wind. "Please, no call soldiers. No call the riders." Jacob frowned. "What riders?" She swallowed hard, glancing toward the barn doors as if monsters lurked just outside. "Men with guns. They come at night. They burn, they take, they kill." Jacob's heart tightened. He'd heard rumors. A vigilante band that wandered between ranches and abandoned camps, claiming to be protecting settlers. But he knew what that usually meant: frightened young men who believed their rifles made them righteous. Naira continued, voice cracking. "They come to our camp 2 nights ago. Many of us run. Some, not fast enough." Atsa closed her eyes at those words, her thin shoulders trembling. Jacob stepped closer, noticing details he had missed before. A deep bruise on Atsa's ribs. Naira's blistered feet. Their clothes stiff with soot. Lips cracked from dehydration. Hands trembling not just from fear, but from hunger. "When did you last eat?" Jacob asked quietly. Naira lowered her gaze. "Maybe 4 days." Those words hit him like a hammer. He remembered another night, long ago, the cold wind, the smell of smoke, the sight of his own cabin burning. He remembered running, screaming his wife's and daughter's names. He remembered the emptiness that followed. Frontier violence had taken his family, same as it was now taking theirs. Something inside him shifted, a weight he'd carried for years suddenly moving, cracking open. He wasn't just looking at 2 fugitives. He was looking at ghosts of his own past. Jacob moved to the barn kitchen box, grabbing a tin of biscuits and a water jug. When he offered them, Naira hesitated, unsure if it was a trick. But the gentle nod he gave her, steady, quiet, honest, melted her fear just enough. She helped Atsa drink first, then ate slowly, almost timidly, as if expecting the food to vanish. "Thank you," Naira whispered. The way she said it held more emotion than the words themselves, gratitude wrapped in disbelief. Jacob sat beside them, leaning against a bale of hay, lantern casting a warm glow around the 3 unlikely companions. He didn't know what was coming next. Not yet. But something in the girl's eyes, hope edged with desperation, told him that whatever path lay ahead, he had already chosen his side. The frontier had taken enough from him. He wouldn't let it take them too. Word traveled fast in a town as small and brittle as Dry Creek. By late afternoon, talk had already slithered from the saloon to the general store and onto the dirt roads where ranch hands swapped gossip while repairing fence lines. 2 Apaches seen near Grady's land, someone muttered. Then someone else swore they'd seen tracks in the dust. Another insisted he'd heard a war cry echoing through the bluffs. Rumors grew legs, then teeth, then a shape of their own. By sundown, fear had swollen into anger. Men gathered outside the sheriff's office, their faces hard, their tempers brittle. At the center of them stood Silas Boone, a rancher carved from dust and bitterness. His son had died 3 winters earlier during a raid, and although no one knew who fired the fatal arrow, Silas blamed every Apache still breathing. "We're riding out," Silas growled, tightening the cinch on his saddle. "If they're near Grady's place, we're finned in 'em. And this time we finish the job." The posse saddled up, a dozen men carrying rifles, lanterns, and the kind of rage that needed blood to cool. Jacob heard them long before he saw them, the rhythmic thunder of hooves, the metallic jangle of spurs, voices barking orders through the night. His pulse kicked hard. The 2 Apache women looked at him, fear lighting their eyes, but there was no time for assurance, no time for much of anything. "Come on," Jacob whispered. He cleared a space in the barn, pulling aside hay bales until he uncovered a dark, narrow hollow between the feed sacks and the plank wall. The women slid in without a word. Jacob piled the hay back carefully, his hands shaking, his ears tuned to the approaching danger. Torchlight washed over the yard as the riders drew up in front of the barn. "Evenin', Grady," Silas Boone called, though his tone carried no courtesy. "We're looking for Apaches. Tracks lead this way." Jacob stepped out into the lantern glow, forcing the breath to stay steady in his chest. "Ain't seen no one round here but cattle," he said. "You're welcome to look, but you're wasting your time." Silas studied him, eyes sharp, suspicion coiled in them. "We'll search the barn." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Ain't nothing in there but feed. Storm spooked my livestock enough today. Rather not rile 'em again." Silas leaned forward in the saddle. "You refusing a lawful search?" Jacob held his ground, though his stomach felt like water. "I'm saying there's nothing here. You know me, Boone. If I'd seen trouble, I'd speak up." For a long moment, silence pressed between them. Then Silas spat into the dirt. "Fine. But we're riding the line at dawn. If you're hiding 'em." His voice hardened to granite. "You'll answer for it." The posse turned and rode off into the darkness, the echo of their horses lingering like a threat carved into the night. Jacob didn't move until the last light disappeared over the ridge, because he knew one thing for certain. They would be back. And next time, they wouldn't leave without tearing that barn apart. The moment the posse's lantern light vanished from the ridge, Jacob hurried into the barn. The 2 women pushed aside the hay, coughing softly as dust drifted from their clothes. Their eyes searched his face, reading the truth there, the danger had not passed. Not even close. "We have to move," Jacob said quietly. "They'll be back at first light, and when they come, they won't ask so politely." He saddled 3 horses with trembling hands, his chestnut mare for himself, a sturdy bay for Naira, and a small Appaloosa for Atsa. The old horse wasn't fast, but he was steady, and Jacob hoped steady would be enough to reach the narrow canyon miles east. The canyon's twisting walls created natural blind spots, a place where sound disappeared and riders couldn't follow easily. If he could get them there before dawn, the posse would lose their trail. But when he helped Atsa toward the horse, her legs gave out. She couldn't even break her fall. Jacob caught her in his arms, shocked at how light she felt, like a bundle of sticks wrapped in worn cloth. "Atsa?" Naira dropped beside her mother. "Amma, please, just stand. Just try." Atsa's lips moved, but no sound came. Her breath fluttered shallowly, each inhale rattling as though scraped from something broken inside her. She had been strong enough to ride into the storm, strong enough to keep moving even while hunted, but whatever strength remained had been burned away by fear, exhaustion, and days without rest. "She can't travel like this," Jacob murmured. Naira lifted her head sharply, eyes shining with terror. "Then we stay. All of us." We don't leave her. Please. We can't stay here, Jacob said, voice low, steady but strained. Boone's men will tear this place apart come sunrise. Then take us together. Naira's voice cracked. If she dies on that horse, at least she dies with me. Don't ask me to leave her. Don't. Jacob knelt beside them, overwhelmed by the weight of her desperation. No words came at first. Just the sound of the wind slipping through the barn boards. Just the soft, trembling breaths of a woman too weak to run from the man who wanted her dead. Finally, Jacob placed a hand on Naira's shoulder. Listen to me, he said quietly, firmly. No one is dying on my land today. Not your mother. Not you. Not while I still draw breath. The fear in Naira's gaze didn't vanish, but it softened. Trust flickered there, fragile but real. Jacob tightened the saddle straps, jaw set. If the posse came at dawn, Jacob Grady would be ready, and he'd make damn sure the sun wasn't rising on 3 graves. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Jacob heard the thunder of hooves rolling across his land like a storm with purpose. He stepped outside just as torchlight flared between the trees. The posse had returned earlier, angrier, and armed for blood. Boone rode at the front, his jaw clenched, his rifle already drawn. Grady, he barked. We're done playing games. Step aside. Jacob didn't move. Inside the barn, Naira helped her mother sit upright, but Atsa pushed her daughter's hands away. For the first time since Jacob had found them, the old woman forced herself to stand. Her body trembled violently, yet something ancient and fierce burned behind her eyes. She stepped forward into the amber glow leaking through the barn's open door. With barely enough breath to speak, she began a low, rhythmic chant and Apache protection prayer, voice thin but unwavering. Her hands rose, shaking, tracing sacred motions in the air. The vigilantes froze. Even Boone hesitated, unease cutting through his rage. Jacob placed himself between the women and the rifles pointed at them. This is my land, he said. And they're under my protection. Move aside, Boone snarled. I lost a son to their kind. I won't lose my chance at justice. This isn't justice, Jacob shot back. You know it. Tension snapped tight as bowstrings. Men shifted on their saddles, guns ready. One wrong breath would ignite the standoff. Then another set of hooves approached, fast. Sheriff Calder burst through the trees, deputies behind him. Boone, he shouted. Stand down. Boone glared. They're Apaches, Sheriff. And they're under lawful protection, Calder said, pointing at Jacob. Grady told me everything. These women harmed no one. The sheriff dismounted and stepped beside Jacob. You want to fight, he told Boone, you'll be fighting the law. The barn fell silent. For the first time that night, Jacob felt hope break through the fear. Atsa's strength had burned bright during the standoff, but the flame faded quickly after. Jacob and Naira tended to her as best they could, offering water, warm blankets, and soft words, but age, hunger, and fear had taken their toll long before they found his barn. 2 nights after the posse's return, Atsa passed quietly in her sleep. No struggle. No sound. Just a final breath drifting into the still desert night. Naira wept into Jacob's shoulder, her grief raw but dignified, like the land she came from. Jacob stayed with her until morning, keeping a lantern lit beside the bed so she wouldn't feel alone. At sunrise, the two of them carried Atsa's body into the hills overlooking Jacob's ranch, a place where the wind whispered across sagebrush and the sky stretched in endless blue. Naira chose a spot near a lone juniper tree. Together, they laid Atsa to rest beneath a mound of river stones, marked with a simple wooden carving Jacob made himself. In the days that followed, Naira remained on the ranch to recover. She helped mend fences, gathered water, and cooked meals in Jacob's small kitchen. They spoke little, but the silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful, built on shared loss and hard-earned trust. Meanwhile, Sheriff Calder dealt with the vigilantes. Boone, the bitter rancher who led the posse, received a heavy fine and a stern warning: any further harassment of native families would land him in jail. Life on the ranch slowly settled again, but Jacob and Naira both knew things had changed forever. Their paths had crossed in violence, and bound them in unexpected hope. In time, Naira found her way to a small band of surviving Apache relatives living deeper in the Mesa country. They welcomed her with open arms, helping her rebuild a life shaped by loss but not defeated by it. Still, she often returned to Jacob's ranch, sometimes to help with chores, sometimes just to sit on the porch and watch the sun sink behind the red hills. Their bond remained quiet, steady, and unbroken, a reminder that kindness can take root even in the harshest soil. On a frontier built on fear and vengeance, one cowboy chose humanity. And because he did, 2 lives, including his own, were forever changed. As the final shot fades to amber twilight, the voiceover returns.